Texas Hill Country, 1877. The drought that summer had baked the earth to a dusty brown, and the afternoon sun beat down mercilessly as Vaughn Caldwell rode toward the Crawford Ranch. At 25, he had already lived the hard life of a cowhand for 7 years, drifting from outfit to outfit across 3 states. The war had ended 12 years ago, but its shadow still stretched across the land, and Vaughn carried his own private war within. He believed that a man who opened his heart on the frontier was asking for trouble. Love was a luxury for those in settled towns with white picket fences, not for men who lived by their wits and their gun hands in a land that took more than it gave. His father's death defending their small homestead from raiders had taught him early that attachment meant vulnerability, and vulnerability meant death. Better to remain unencumbered, moving with the seasons and the cattle drives, taking his pay and spending it as he pleased. No responsibilities beyond the day's work. No one to mourn if a steer gored him or a horse threw him. That was the cowboy's way, solitary, free, and safe from the pain that came with caring too much. Yet here he was, returning to the same ranch for the 3rd season, drawn back by decent pay, fair treatment, and something else he refused to name that made his chest tighten whenever he thought of the sprawling homestead just visible on the horizon. The Crawford spread wasn't the biggest in the county, but it was well managed, with good water access and prime grazing land. Old man Thomas Crawford had died the previous winter, leaving his daughter to run things. Most folks expected she'd sell out or marry quick, but Clara Thomas had other ideas. At 23, she'd been managing the books and much of the business for years while her father's health declined, and she wasn't about to surrender her independence or her legacy. Vaughn remembered the first time he'd seen her, 3 springs ago. She'd been standing on the porch, honey-blonde hair caught in the breeze, wearing a practical blue cotton dress with the sleeves rolled to her elbows as she gave instructions to the ranch hands. There was nothing soft about the way she ran the place, but there was something in her green eyes that spoke of determination rather than hardness. Beneath her no-nonsense exterior lay a depth that intrigued him, though he'd never admit it. As he approached the main house, he noticed unusual activity, wagons being loaded, extra horses saddled. Something was happening, and a sense of unease crept up his spine. He dismounted near the corral, where the ranch foreman Ellis was adjusting a saddle. "Afternoon," Vaughn called. "Looks like I picked an interesting day to show up." Ellis glanced up, recognition spreading across his weathered face. "Caldwell. Didn't expect to see you back this season. Said I'd return when the spring roundup started." Vaughn patted his horse's neck. "Seems like you're preparing for something bigger than just gathering strays." Ellis's expression darkened. "Miss Clara's brother is arriving, Walter Thomas. Been back east for years, but suddenly decided to take an interest in his inheritance." Never heard her mention a brother. "They ain't close. He left for schooling before the war and barely came back since. Now with their pa gone," Ellis shrugged, "he sent word he's coming to assess the situation. Miss Clara's been in a state ever since." Vaughn frowned. "It's her ranch now. Legal and proper." "Half hers," Ellis corrected. "Old man Crawford left it equally to both his children. We just never thought Walter would leave his fancy Boston life to claim his share." A shout from the bunkhouse drew Ellis away, leaving Vaughn to consider this new complication. He led his horse to the stable, taking his time with the unsaddling and grooming. He was in no hurry to announce his presence to Clara. Their last parting had been uncomfortable. Not hostile, but charged with unspoken words and glances that lingered too long. After settling his horse, Vaughn retrieved his bedroll and made his way toward the bunkhouse. A flash of blue caught his eye, Clara emerging from the main house, headed for the small stand of oak trees beyond the garden. Something in her hurried gait and the stiff set of her shoulders made him change direction. He told himself it was just curiosity about the ranch situation, nothing more. She didn't notice his approach, too absorbed in whatever she held in her hands. As he drew closer, the sound of muffled sobs stopped him in his tracks. Clara Thomas was seated on a rough wooden bench beneath the largest oak, her face buried in her hands, a crumpled piece of paper clutched in her fingers. Her shoulders shook with each suppressed cry. Vaughn had seen men weep from pain, from loss, from too much whiskey. He'd even shed tears himself, alone under vast prairie skies, when memories of his father grew too heavy. But something about Clara's evident distress struck him like a physical blow. She was always so composed, so certain, that seeing her broken open like this felt wrong. He cleared his throat gently. "Miss Thomas." Her head snapped up, eyes widening in shock and embarrassment. She hastily wiped her cheeks and tucked the letter into her pocket in one fluid motion. "Vaughn," she blinked rapidly, clearly struggling to compose herself. "I mean, Mr. Caldwell, I didn't realize you'd arrived." "Just rode in." He stood awkwardly, hat in hand. "Ellis mentioned your brother's coming." Clara's jaw tightened. News travels fast on a small ranch. "Is everything all right?" He gestured vaguely toward her pocket where the letter had disappeared. "Just business matters." Her voice was clipped, defensive. "Nothing that concerns the hands." The dismissal was clear, but Vaughn found himself unable to walk away as he should. "Sometimes talking helps," he offered, surprising himself. "Not that it's my business, but—" "You're right," she interrupted. "It isn't your business." She stood, smoothing her skirt with trembling hands. "If you're here for the spring work, report to Ellis in the morning. Your usual bunk is available." She moved to brush past him, but Vaughn, acting on instinct rather than thought, gently caught her elbow. "Clara." The use of her first name, something he'd never done before, made her freeze. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the barriers between employer and employee, woman and man, seemed to dissolve. She looked younger suddenly, vulnerable in a way that tugged at something long dormant inside him. "Whatever's in that letter," he said softly, "it doesn't change who you are or what you've built here." A flicker of surprise crossed her face, followed by something unreadable. "You don't know what it says." "Don't need to. I know you." The moment stretched between them, taut with possibility. Then Clara pulled her arm free, her expression closing like a door against winter cold. "You don't know me at all, Mr. Caldwell. And I prefer to keep it that way." She walked away with her spine straight and her head high, every inch the rancher's daughter, leaving Vaughn to wonder what ghost from her past could shake such a steadfast woman, and why he cared so much. The next morning brought no answers, only work. The spring roundup was beginning, and every hand was needed to gather the cattle that had scattered during the winter months. Vaughn found himself assigned to ride the northwestern section with two other men, both new to the ranch. They seemed competent enough, though one, Jordan, talked enough for three men, while the other, Martinez, barely spoke at all. Clara was nowhere to be seen as they rode out at dawn. Ellis handled all the assignments, his manner more brusque than usual. The tension around the ranch was palpable, with whispers about the imminent arrival of Walter Thomas circulating among the men. Some speculated that he would sell his half to larger ranching interests looking to expand. Others thought he might try to wrest control entirely from his sister. None of the possibilities boded well for the future of the place or for those who worked there. For 3 days, Vaughn and the others combed the rough country, locating stray cattle and driving them back toward the home pastures. The work was exhausting but familiar, allowing little time for thought beyond the next ridge to check or ravine to explore. By the 4th day, muscles aching and beard growing thick, Vaughn found himself almost grateful for the physical demands that kept his mind from wandering to the image of Clara's tear-streaked face. They were watering the horses at a small creek when Jordan sidled up beside him. "Heard you've worked this spread before," he said, rolling a cigarette with practiced fingers. Vaughn nodded. "3rd season." "What's your read on the lady boss?" Jordan struck a match against his boot heel. "Seems mighty determined for a woman alone." Something in the man's tone raised Vaughn's hackles. "Miss Thomas knows this land better than most men who have spent their whole lives in these parts. She's fair with her hands and pays on time." Jordan exhaled a plume of smoke, eyeing Vaughn speculatively. "Just asking, friend." "Word is her brother's bringing some Eastern moneymen to look over the operation. Might be changes coming." "Where'd you hear that?" "Cook's helper in town." Says Walter Thomas has been writing to business associates about investment opportunities in Texas cattle. Vaughn frowned. If true, it suggested Walter wasn't just coming to claim his inheritance but to leverage it for profit, possibly at his sister's expense. Before he could probe further, Martinez called from upstream, having spotted a small group of yearlings in a stand of scrub oak. They returned to the ranch late that evening, driving about 30 head before them. The main house was ablaze with lamplight, and an unfamiliar carriage stood in the yard, clearly not local, with its polished wood and brass fittings. Walter Thomas had arrived. In the bunkhouse that night, Ellis confirmed what many had suspected. "Eastern gentlemen with fancy ideas," he muttered, slumping onto his bunk. 4 of them, including the brother, talking about modernizing operations and expanding the market reach. As if Miss Clara hasn't been selling to Kansas City buyers for years. "How's she taking it?" Vaughn asked, trying to sound merely professionally concerned. Ellis gave him a knowing look. "Holding her own, but it's rough. That brother of hers treats her like she's been playing at ranching while he was learning real business. Doesn't seem to understand that she's kept this place afloat through drought and market crashes." The next day, Clara herself appeared at the corral, as the men were preparing to ride out. She looked tired, the shadows under her eyes suggesting a sleepless night, but her voice was steady as she addressed them. "As some of you may have noticed, my brother Walter has arrived with business associates." She surveyed the assembled hands. "There will be some discussions about the future of the ranch, but nothing is decided. I expect everyone to continue their duties as usual and to extend every courtesy to our guests." Her gaze swept across the men, briefly meeting Vaughn's before moving on. "Some of you will be asked to guide them around the property. Mr. Caldwell, you know the northwest section better than most. You'll take my brother and Mr. Harrington there tomorrow." Vaughn nodded, suppressing his surprise at being singled out. Clara turned away without further comment, but not before he caught a flash of something in her expression. Not quite fear, but a guarded wariness that troubled him. That evening, returning from the day's work, Vaughn saw Clara slip away from the house again, heading toward the same oak grove. Despite every instinct telling him to mind his own business, he found himself following at a discreet distance. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks that would have been beautiful under different circumstances. He found her at the same bench, holding another letter, or perhaps the same one, staring at it with such intensity that she didn't notice his approach until he was nearly upon her. "Are you making a habit of this, Mr. Caldwell?" she asked without looking up, her voice weary rather than angry. "Just wanted to know what to expect tomorrow." He remained standing, giving her space. "Your brother, is he reasonable?" Clara gave a short, humorless laugh. "Walter has always been perfectly reasonable when it suits his interests." "And does selling the ranch suit his interests?" Now she did look up, surprise evident in her expression. "You've been listening to gossip." "Hard not to, in a bunkhouse full of men worried about their futures." She sighed, folding the letter carefully this time. "Walter doesn't want to sell outright. He wants to bring in investors, expand, drive more cattle north instead of selling locally. Change everything. And you don't. This land," she gestured to the rolling hills around them, now shadowed in twilight. "It's not just property to me. My father built this place when there was nothing but wilderness and hostels. My mother died here giving birth to me. Every fence post, every branded calf, every windmill, they tell a story I'm part of." The passion in her voice stirred something in Vaughn, reminding him of his own father's love for their small homestead. A love that had ultimately cost him his life. "What's in the letter?" he asked quietly. Clara's hand tightened around the paper. "That's private." "Does it have something to do with your brother's plans?" "Why do you care?" Her question held no accusation, only genuine curiosity. "You're a drifter, Vaughn. Come spring, stay summer, gone by winter. What difference does it make to you what happens to this ranch?" The use of his first name didn't escape his notice, nor did the implied criticism of his rootless existence. "Maybe I'm tired of watching good things get destroyed by men who only see dollar signs." She studied him in the fading light, as if seeing him properly for the first time. "You surprise me, Mr. Caldwell." "Vaughn," he corrected gently. "If we're going to be conspirators against your brother's grand plans, you might as well use my name." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Is that what we are, conspirators?" "Depends on what you want." He took a step closer. "If you're fighting to keep the ranch as it is, I reckon you could use allies." "Why would you be my ally? You have no stake here." It was a fair question, one Vaughn wasn't entirely sure he could answer honestly, even to himself. What was this pull he felt toward Clara Thomas and her struggle? Why did the thought of her losing her home affect him so deeply, when he'd spent years convincing himself that attachment to places and people was a fool's game? "Let's just say I respect what you've built," he said finally. "And I've seen too many good outfits swallowed up by men who have never felt the sun on their backs while moving cattle." She seemed to accept this, nodding slowly. "Tomorrow when you ride with Walter and Harrington, they'll ask questions about the condition of the herd, water access, grazing quality, their assessing value." "And you want me to?" "Just be honest," she said. "But perhaps don't volunteer information about the new springs we found last season, or the fact that the northwest corner would be perfect for expansion." Vaughn allowed himself a small smile. "Might be I notice more problems than opportunities tomorrow." "I wouldn't ask you to lie. Some truths just don't need telling to every man who asks," he replied. "I understand the difference." Clara stood, tucking the letter into her pocket once more. In the dimming light, with her hair coming loose from its pins and her eyes shadowed with worry, she looked both vulnerable and determined, a combination that stirred something protective in Vaughn's chest. "Thank you," she said simply. "Good night, Vaughn." He watched her walk back toward the house, her figure gradually fading into the gathering darkness. Only when she was completely out of sight did he realize he still didn't know what was in that damned letter that had brought her to tears. Walter Thomas proved to be everything Vaughn had expected and less. Fashionably dressed in clothes too fine for ranch work, with soft hands and a condescending manner, he viewed the land through the lens of potential profit rather than heritage. His companion, Harrington, was worse, a banker type who made notes in a small book and asked pointed questions about carrying capacity and market access. Vaughn led them on a circuitous route through the northwest section, casually highlighting areas where erosion had been a problem or mentioning the difficulties of the previous drought, without specifying how well the land had actually recovered. He wasn't lying precisely, just focusing on challenges rather than opportunities. "My sister seems to think this section could support another 100 head, Walter commented as they paused on a ridge overlooking a broad valley. "What's your assessment, Caldwell?" Vaughn shrugged. "Land can fool you. Looks promising in spring, turns mean in August heat. But with additional water development." "Drilling's expensive," Vaughn interrupted, "and no guarantee you'll hit water. Last outfit that tried just east of here went down 300 feet and got nothing but disappointment." Harrington made another note, frowning slightly. Walter studied Vaughn with narrowed eyes. "You seem rather pessimistic about the prospects here. Yet you've returned to work for my sister multiple seasons." "Steady work is steady work," Vaughn replied evenly. "Miss Thomas runs a tight operation with what she has. Smart enough not to overextend." The implication hung in the air between them. Walter's expression darkened briefly before he forced a smile. "Well, I appreciate your candor, Caldwell. Always valuable to get perspectives from men who work the land directly." By the time they returned to the ranch, Vaughn was certain he'd given Walter and his investor friend plenty to consider, none of it encouraging to grand expansion plans. Whether it would make any difference remained to be seen. Clara was waiting on the porch when they rode in, her expression carefully neutral as she greeted her brother and Harrington. She didn't acknowledge Vaughn directly, but he caught the slight nod of thanks as he led the horses away. That evening, a telegram arrived from town. Vaughn happened to be near the main house, repairing a section of fence when the messenger rode up. Clara emerged to receive it, her face paling as she read the brief message. Without a word, she retreated inside, where raised voices soon echoed through the open windows. Hours later, after supper in the bunkhouse, Vaughn noticed a light still burning in the small office attached to the main house. Acting on instinct rather than reason, he made his way across the yard, ostensibly to check on a horse in the nearby stable. Through the window, he could see Clara bent over the desk, surrounded by papers and ledgers. Even from a distance, he could tell she was exhausted, her usual perfect posture giving way to slumped shoulders. Without allowing himself to reconsider, he knocked lightly on the door. She looked up, startled, then frowned when she saw who it was. Nevertheless, she called, "Come in." The office was warm, a small fire burning in the corner stove. The walls were lined with books, practical volumes on animal husbandry and ranch management mixed with a few well-worn novels. The desk was large and solid, clearly old but well-maintained. "Something wrong with your bunk, mister?" Caldwell, Clara asked, setting down her pen. "Thought you might want to know how it went today," he replied. "With your brother." She gestured to the chair across from her. "I gathered from Walter's mood that he found the northwest section less promising than anticipated. Might have mentioned a few challenges." Vaughn settled into the chair, noting the dark circles under her eyes. "That telegram bad news?" Clara's hand moved unconsciously to her pocket, where he suspected the mysterious letter now resided. "Nothing unexpected. Important enough to keep you working past midnight." She sighed, rubbing her temples. "Walter received confirmation that a representative from Continental Cattle Investments will arrive next week. They're interested in buying his half of the ranch and possibly pressuring me to sell mine." "Can they do that? Force you out?" "Not legally, no, but practically." She gestured to the ledgers spread before her. "The ranch is profitable, but margins are tight. If Walter sells to them and they make operating as partners impossible, I might have no choice but to sell eventually." Vaughn leaned forward. "What do you mean, make operating impossible?" "They could block access to water rights we share, dispute grazing boundaries, tie everything up in expensive legal challenges I can't afford to fight." She looked up, meeting his gaze directly. "Or they could simply offer so much money that refusing would seem like madness to everyone except me." The defeat in her voice bothered him more than he wanted to admit. "There has to be another way. I've been searching for one for days." She gestured to the papers before her. "I could try to buy Walter's half, but I don't have nearly enough capital. The bank won't extend sufficient credit to a woman, regardless of the ranch's performance." Vaughn thought for a moment. What if you had a partner, someone local who could help raise the money? "Like who?" "The neighboring ranches are either struggling themselves, or would be just as happy to see this place absorbed by bigger interests." A wild idea began forming in Vaughn's mind, one that went against everything he'd told himself about staying unattached and independent. What about someone with a stake in seeing the ranch continue as it is? Someone who knows the operation, respects what you've built. Clara frowned, not following his meaning. "I don't understand." He took a deep breath. "I've been saving most of my wages for years. It's not a fortune, but it's something. And I know others, good men who have worked outfits that were swallowed up by bigger interests. Men with both skills and some capital who might be persuaded to invest in a place where they'd have a voice." Her eyes widened as she realized what he was suggesting. You'd want to buy into the ranch." "Not just me. A consortium, maybe. Small investors who'd be actual working partners, not absentee owners." The idea gained clarity as he spoke. Men who'd put their backs into making this place thrive because they'd have a real stake in its success. For a long moment, Clara simply stared at him, astonishment written across her features. "Why would you do this? You've never shown interest in settling anywhere, let alone becoming a ranch owner." It was a fair question, one Vaughn had been asking himself since the idea had taken shape. Why did he care so much about this particular ranch, this particular woman's fight? The answer that came to him was both simple and terrifying. "Maybe I've been running from the wrong things," he said quietly. "Convincing myself that not caring was safer than risking loss again. Their eyes met across the desk, and something unspoken passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, that they were both wrestling with fears bigger than the immediate threat to the ranch. "The letter," she said suddenly, pulling it from her pocket. "The one you found me crying over. It's from my mother." Vaughn blinked, confused. "I thought your mother died when you were born." "She did. She wrote a series of letters before I was born, when she realized her pregnancy was difficult. My father kept them, giving me one each birthday until I turned 18. Clara smoothed the creased paper with gentle fingers. "This was the last one. I've read it countless times, but with Walter returning and everything changing." She trailed off, lost in memory. Vaughn waited, sensing she needed to share this but unsure why she'd chosen him as her confidant. "She wrote about this land," Clara continued, "about how she and my father had dreamed of building something that would last generations. How she hoped I would love it as they did, see it not just as property but as a living legacy." Her voice caught. "She said that true wealth isn't measured in acres or cattle, but in putting down roots deep enough to withstand any storm." Vaughn thought of his own father, who had loved their small homestead with similar passion, and died defending it. For years he'd seen that love as a weakness that had cost his father his life. Now, watching Clara's face as she spoke of her mother's words, he wondered if he'd misunderstood entirely. "My mother knew she might not survive to raise me," Clara said, "but she believed this land would give me the strength she couldn't, and now I might lose it." The vulnerability in her admission touched something deep within Vaughn. Without thinking, he reached across the desk, covering her hand with his own. "You won't," he said firmly. "We'll find a way." She didn't pull away, and for a moment they remained connected by that simple touch, both aware that something fundamental had shifted between them. Finally, Clara withdrew her hand, but her expression had changed, the defeat replaced by cautious determination. "It would take a lot of money, Vaughn, more than you and a few cowboys have saved." "Let me worry about that part. I've got some ideas." He stood, suddenly energized by purpose. "We have until this continental representative arrives to put something together. A week, you said." She nodded, studying him with a mixture of hope and skepticism. "This isn't your fight." "Maybe I'm tired of not having anything worth fighting for." The words hung in the air between them, loaded with implications neither was ready to address directly. Clara ducked her head, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. "It's late," she said, gathering papers together. "We can discuss this further tomorrow." Vaughn recognized the dismissal and moved toward the door. "Get some rest, Clara. Tomorrow we start planning how to save your ranch." He stepped out into the cool night, his mind racing with possibilities. The past 7 years of drifting suddenly seemed like preparation for this moment, connections made, favors owed, knowledge gained across 3 states that might now serve a purpose he'd never anticipated. For the first time since his father's death, Vaughn Caldwell felt the pull of something stronger than his fear of attachment, the desire to build rather than merely survive. Over the next days, Vaughn worked double time, performing his regular ranch duties during the day while using every spare moment to develop his plan. He rode into town twice, sending telegrams to former riding partners and making inquiries at the local bank. He had long conversations with Ellis and selected other hands he trusted, gauging interest in his proposed consortium. Walter and his associates continued their assessment of the ranch, now focusing on the southern and eastern sections. Clara maintained a professional composure in their presence, neither revealing her opposition to their plans nor her budding alliance with Vaughn. 3 days before the Continental representative was due to arrive, Vaughn rode back from town with news that couldn't wait. He found Clara in the vegetable garden behind the main house, kneeling among rows of early spring plantings. She looked up at his approach, shielding her eyes against the late afternoon sun. "You're back earlier than expected," she observed, brushing soil from her hands as she stood. "Got responses to my telegrams." He glanced toward the house, ensuring they weren't overheard. "3 men I trust have expressed interest. Combined with my savings and what Ellis and Martinez are willing to contribute, we're about halfway to a reasonable offer for Walter's half." Hope flickered across Clara's face. That's more than I expected so quickly. It's not enough yet, he cautioned. But I've got a lead on someone who might put us over the top. James Parker, cattle buyer from San Antonio. I've done business with him before, honest man, understands ranching. I sent him a detailed telegram about our situation. Clara hesitated. And you trust him not to simply alert Continental about a competing bid. Parker despises those big Eastern combines. He's lost too much business to their monopolistic practices. Vaughn stepped closer, lowering his voice. There's something else. The bank manager mentioned that Continental has been buying up water rights throughout the county. I think their interest in this place isn't just about cattle, it's about controlling the watershed. Clara's eyes widened. The streams that run through our northwest section feed half the county in dry years. Exactly. If they control those headwaters, they control every ranch downstream. The implications settled between them. This was bigger than just the Crawford Ranch. It was about the future of the entire region. Clara reached out impulsively, gripping Vaughn's arm. We have to stop them. The touch, the fierce determination in her eyes, the way she said "we" without hesitation. It all combined to break something loose inside Vaughn, some final resistance to what he'd been feeling since he'd first seen her crying beneath the oak tree. Before he could respond, the sound of approaching hoofbeats drew their attention. Walter rode into view, accompanied by Harrington and another man Vaughn didn't recognize. They dismounted near the garden, Walter's gaze narrowing as he noticed his sister's hand on Vaughn's arm. Clara withdrew it quickly, straightening her posture. Clara, Walter called, his tone overly pleasant, I've just been showing Mr. Harrington and Mr. Lewis the South pastures. Most impressive, wouldn't you agree, gentlemen? The strangers murmured agreement, their calculating eyes taking in the scene, and Vaughn's presence with evident curiosity. Mr. Caldwell was just reporting on some strays we've recovered, Clara said smoothly. If you'll excuse me, gentlemen, I should see to dinner arrangements. She departed with a meaningful glance at Vaughn that clearly said, be careful. Walter watched her go, then turned his attention to Vaughn. Caldwell, I understand you've been making quite a few trips to town lately. The casual observation carried an undercurrent of suspicion. Vaughn kept his expression neutral. Ranch business. Miss Thomas asked me to deliver some documents to her attorney. It wasn't entirely a lie. Clara had indeed given him papers for her lawyer on his last trip. Walter seemed unsatisfied but didn't press the issue. Well, don't let us keep you from your duties. He dismissed Vaughn with a wave, turning back to his companions. Now, about those water rights we discussed. Vaughn moved away, his concern growing. If Walter was already discussing water rights with these men, time was shorter than they'd thought. That night, unable to sleep, Vaughn stepped out of the bunkhouse for some air. The moon was nearly full, casting silver light across the ranch yard. Movement near the oak grove caught his eye. Clara, once again seeking solitude beneath the trees. He followed, drawn by both concern and something deeper he wasn't ready to name. She heard his approach this time, turning to face him with her mother's letter clutched in her hand. You should be sleeping, she said softly. Dawn comes early. So should you, he settled beside her on the bench. Walter knows something's up. He mentioned my trips to town. Clara sighed. He's always been observant when it suited him. As children, he could always tell when I'd taken the last cookie or borrowed his books without asking. The glimpse into their childhood relationship humanized Walter in a way Vaughn hadn't considered before. Were you close once? Before he left for school, yes. He was my big brother, my protector. A sad smile touched her lips. He taught me to ride, to fish, to shoot straight. Then he went east for education and came back a stranger. Each visit, he seemed more distant from this place, more embarrassed by our provincial life, as he called it. People change, Vaughn said. Sometimes the world reshapes them until they barely recognize themselves. Clara studied him in the moonlight. Is that what happened to you, the world reshaping you into a drifter when you might have been something else? The question struck uncomfortably close to truths Vaughn rarely examined. My father died defending our homestead from raiders during the war. I was 17. Afterward, staying put just seemed like waiting for the next tragedy. So you decided not to care about anything that couldn't be carried in saddlebags. There was no judgment in her tone, only understanding, which somehow made it harder to bear. Caring got my father killed, caring about land, about home, about putting down roots. Clara unfolded her mother's letter, the paper luminous in the moonlight. My mother wrote that love for people, for land, for a way of life, is never wasted, even when it ends in loss. She knew she was dying, but she didn't regret a single moment spent building this ranch with my father or carrying me, even though it ultimately cost her life. Her words pierced the armor Vaughn had built around his heart. Your mother sounds like a wise woman. She was. Clara hesitated, then held out the letter. Would you like to read it? The offer took him by surprise. This letter she had clutched so protectively, cried over, refused to share. Are you sure? She nodded. I think she would have liked you, Vaughn, your willingness to fight for something that isn't even yours. He accepted the letter carefully, aware of the trust this represented. The handwriting was delicate but firm, the ink faded with age. As he read, Mary Thomas's voice emerged clearly, her love for her unborn child, her passion for the land she and her husband had tamed together, her hope that her daughter would find not just prosperity but purpose in continuing their legacy. One passage in particular caught his attention. My dearest Clara, by the time you read this, you will be a young woman making your own choices. Remember that the hardest choice is often between what seems safe and what truly matters. Fear will tell you to protect yourself from pain by avoiding love and connection. But a life built on fear is no life at all. Choose courage, my darling. Choose to love deeply, even knowing loss is possible. The land beneath your feet will sustain you, but only if you give your heart to it completely. Vaughn looked up to find Clara watching him intently. This is why you fought so hard to keep the ranch when your father died, he said. Not just for the land itself, but for the promise you made through her words. Yes, Clara's voice was barely above a whisper. Walter never understood. He sees only property, assets, opportunities for profit. He never read her letters. She would be proud of you, Clara, of what you've built, what you've maintained. Even if I lose it all to Continental. Vaughn refolded the letter, returning it to her with gentle hands. Their fingers brushed and neither pulled away immediately. You haven't lost anything yet, and you won't if I have any say in it. In the moonlight, with her hair loose around her shoulders and vulnerability in her eyes, Clara Thomas was more beautiful than any woman had a right to be. Vaughn felt himself leaning forward, drawn by a force stronger than his long-held convictions about remaining unattached. She met him halfway, her lips touching his with a tentative pressure that quickly deepened into something more certain. Her hand came up to rest against his cheek, fingers tracing the line of his jaw as if memorizing its contours. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Vaughn rested his forehead against hers. I should have done that 2 seasons ago. A soft laugh escaped her. I wouldn't have let you. I was too busy proving I could run this ranch without any man's help. And now, she pulled back slightly to meet his gaze. Now I understand there's a difference between needing help and accepting it freely offered, between weakness and partnership. The word partnership hung between them, loaded with possibilities beyond their immediate plan to save the ranch. I should go, Vaughn said reluctantly, aware of how improper their situation would appear to anyone who happened upon them. Early start tomorrow. Clara nodded, but neither moved immediately. Finally she rose, tucking the letter back into her pocket. Good night, Vaughn. He watched her walk back toward the house, his mind and heart in turmoil. The kiss had been unexpected yet somehow inevitable, crossing a line he'd maintained for years. The strangest part was how right it had felt, as if some piece of himself long missing had finally clicked into place. The next morning, a telegram arrived for Vaughn. James Parker from San Antonio had responded to his inquiry, not just with interest, but with an offer to travel to the Crawford Ranch immediately to discuss terms. He could arrive the very day before the Continental representative. When Vaughn shared this news with Clara during a brief, private moment in the stable, her face lit with hope. This could work, Vaughn. If Parker is serious, if he has the capital you believe he does. He does, Vaughn assured her, and he understands what we're fighting for. It's not just about profit for him. Clara's expression grew serious. What about for you? If this succeeds, if we manage to buy Walter's half, you'd be committed here. No more drifting with the seasons, no more freedom to leave when winter comes. The question was really, are you ready to put down roots? To risk caring about something, someone, that could be lost. Vaughn thought of Mary Thomas's words about choosing courage over fear, about his father who had loved their homestead enough to die defending it. About the emptiness of the past 7 years, moving from place to place without connection or purpose. I think, he said slowly, that true freedom isn't about the ability to leave. It's about finding someplace worth staying. The answer seemed to satisfy her, a soft smile spreading across her face. Before she could respond, Walter's voice called from outside, requesting her presence to review some documents with his associates. We're getting close, she whispered, squeezing Vaughn's hand quickly before departing. Don't give up hope. Hope, it was a dangerous thing for a man who'd spent years expecting the worst. Yet Vaughn found it growing within him, taking root alongside other feelings he was only beginning to acknowledge. 2 days later, James Parker arrived, a stocky, sun-weathered man with shrewd eyes and a firm handshake. Vaughn met him in town, bringing him back to the ranch where Clara waited in her small office. The other potential investors Vaughn had contacted, Ellis, Martinez, and 2 former writing partners who had arrived that morning, gathered to hear Parker's assessment. Continental cattle is pushing hard throughout the region, Parker confirmed after reviewing Clara's ledgers and maps. They're not just after grazing land, they want water control. Once they have that, they can dictate terms to every small operation for 50 miles. And you're willing to counter their offer for Walter's half? Clara asked directly. Parker nodded. I've been looking for the right investment in this area for some time. Caldwell's description of your operation intrigued me, but seeing it firsthand, he gestured to the window, through which the well-maintained buildings and healthy cattle were visible. I'm impressed with what you've accomplished, Miss Thomas. This is exactly the kind of ranch that deserves to remain independent. The question is, Ellis interjected, can we match what Continental is likely to offer Walter? Parker smiled. With my capital combined with what you gentlemen have committed, and a bank note I'm prepared to guarantee personally, yes, I believe we can make a competitive offer. Not excessive, but fair market value. The difference is, we're offering him cash in hand, while Continental likely has terms and conditions attached to their price. Hope surged through the room. Clara's eyes met Vaughn's, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. They were close, so close to saving everything. Walter will be suspicious if I'm involved, Clara noted. He already thinks I'm trying to undermine his negotiations with Continental. Then I'll be the face of our consortium, Parker decided. As far as Walter knows, I'm simply an independent investor who heard a promising property might be available. The rest of you can remain silent partners for now. They spent hours refining their strategy, calculating figures, preparing documents. By evening, a solid plan had taken shape, one that would be presented to Walter the following morning, hours before the Continental representative was scheduled to arrive. As the meeting concluded, Parker pulled Vaughn aside. You didn't mention your personal interest in this situation when you contacted me. Vaughn frowned. My personal interest. Parker's expression was knowing. I've been in this business 30 years, son. I recognize a man fighting for more than just a business opportunity when I see one. He nodded toward Clara, who was deep in conversation with Ellis across the room. She's quite a woman. Reminds me of my late wife. Same fire, same determination. Vaughn didn't deny it. The ranch is what matters right now. Of course, Parker agreed, but when this business is concluded, you might consider what else matters. He clapped Vaughn on the shoulder. Get some rest. Tomorrow will decide everything. That night, unable to sleep, Vaughn found himself drawn once more to the oak grove. He wasn't surprised to find Clara already there, sitting on the familiar bench, her mother's letter open in her hands. "Seeking courage?" he asked softly, joining her. She smiled. "Reminding myself what's at stake." She folded the letter carefully. "Are you nervous about tomorrow?" "Terrified," he admitted. Walter could still reject our offer, choose Continental out of spite, or because they sweetened the deal at the last minute. "Yes," she agreed, "but for the first time since he arrived, I feel like we have a fighting chance." She turned to face him fully. "Whatever happens tomorrow, Vaughn, I want you to know how much your help has meant to me. Not just the practical aspects, finding investors, developing strategy, but believing in this place. In me." "The believing part came easy," he said. "It's the rest that surprised me." "What do you mean?" He struggled to articulate feelings. He was only beginning to understand himself. "I've spent years convincing myself that caring deeply about anything, land, home, people, was a fool's game that only led to pain. Then I saw you crying over that letter, fighting so hard for this ranch and something just. Shifted." Clara's eyes shone in the moonlight. "And now? Now I'm terrified in a completely different way," he admitted with a rueful laugh. "Because I suddenly have so much more to lose than just my freedom to drift." She reached for his hand, interlacing their fingers. "My mother would say that's exactly how you know you're truly living." The simplicity of the gesture, the warmth of her hand in his, settled something inside Vaughn. Whatever tomorrow brought, this moment, this connection, was real. "Clara," he began hesitantly, "when this is over, if we succeed." A branch snapped nearby, interrupting him. They turned to see Walter standing at the edge of the grove, his expression unreadable in the shadows. "Well," he said flatly, "this explains a great deal." Clara stood quickly, though she didn't release Vaughn's hand. "Walter, what are you doing out here so late?" "I might ask you the same question, sister." Walter stepped forward into a shaft of moonlight, revealing features tight with anger. "Though the answer seems obvious now. Secret meetings with a ranch hand. Really, Clara, I expected better judgment from you." Vaughn tensed, but Clara's grip tightened, keeping him in place. "Mr. Caldwell and I were discussing ranch business." Walter's laugh held no humor, I'm sure, just as all his recent trips to town were ranch business. Just as the arrival of that cattle buyer from San Antonio is coincidence. He shook his head. "Do you think I'm a fool? I know you're plotting to interfere with the Continental deal." "It's your half of the ranch, Walter," Clara said evenly. "You're entitled to sell to whomever you choose, but yes, we've arranged an alternative offer for your consideration." Walter's gaze shifted to Vaughn. "So the drifting cowboy fancies himself a businessman now. Or perhaps he simply fancies himself the next master of Crawford Ranch, with my sister as the convenient path to ownership." The accusation struck like a physical blow. Vaughn stepped forward, but Clara moved between them. "That's enough, Walter. Mr. Parker will present his offer formally tomorrow morning. Judge it on its merits, not on your assumptions about my personal relationships." Walter studied them both for a long moment. "The Continental representative arrives at noon. I'll hear Parker's offer at 9. He turned to leave, then paused. "Whatever game you're playing, Clara, remember that I knew you when you were still chasing butterflies in these same fields. Don't mistake my business interests for a lack of concern for your welfare." With that cryptic statement, he disappeared into the darkness, leaving Clara and Vaughn in troubled silence. "That complicates things," Vaughn finally said. Clara sighed. Walter has always had impeccable timing for interruptions, even as children. She turned back to him. "What were you going to say?" before he appeared. Vaughn hesitated. The moment had passed, and tomorrow's uncertainties loomed larger than ever. "It can wait. We should both get some rest before morning." Disappointment flickered across her face, but she nodded. "You're right. Tomorrow will be challenging enough without exhaustion clouding our judgment." They walked back toward the ranch buildings together, parting ways with nothing more than a brief touch of hands, both aware that Walter might still be watching from the shadows. Morning arrived with a tension that seemed to permeate the entire ranch. Word had spread among the hands that something significant was happening, though few knew the details. Vaughn busied himself with routine chores, trying to ignore the knot of anxiety in his stomach as 9 o'clock approached. At precisely 9, James Parker entered the main house, leather portfolio in hand, to present the consortium's offer to Walter. Clara, despite her right to be present as co-owner, had decided to absent herself to avoid inflaming Walter's suspicions further. Vaughn found her in the stable, methodically brushing her mare though the animal was already gleaming. She looked up at his approach, her expression a mixture of hope and fear. "Any news?" she asked. He shook his head. "Still talking. Ellis is positioned near the house. He'll signal when Parker emerges." Clara nodded, returning to her brushing with increased vigor. "I keep thinking about all the ways this could go wrong. Walter could simply refuse out of spite. Continental could arrive early and make a scene. Parker could decide the risk isn't worth it after all." "Parker's solid," Vaughn assured her. "And Walter, for all his faults, is a businessman. He'll consider the offer seriously." "Will he?" "After finding us together last night, he's convinced this is all some scheme concocted by a ranch hand trying to seduce his way into ownership." The brush moved faster across the horse's flank. "As if I haven't been running this place successfully for years without any man's help." Vaughn reached out, gently stilling her hand. "Walter knows better. Whatever he might say in anger, he's seen what you've built here. And our offer is genuine, Clara. Fair market value, cash in hand, no strings attached." She met his gaze, vulnerability evident beneath her determined exterior. "And if he accepts? If this actually works? Then you keep your ranch, keep your mother's legacy, build the future she hoped for you." "And what about you?" The question was soft but direct. "Last night before Walter interrupted, were you going to ask to stay, not just as an investor but—" She trailed off, leaving the possibility unnamed between them. Vaughn took a deep breath, ready to answer with the truth that had been growing in his heart when a shout from outside interrupted. "They're done," Ellis called from the doorway. "Parker's coming out now." Clara and Vaughn hurried from the stable, crossing the yard to where Parker stood on the main house porch. His expression gave nothing away as they approached. "Well?" Clara demanded, unable to contain her anxiety any longer. Parker glanced around at the hands who had stopped their work to observe the drama unfolding. "Perhaps we should discuss this privately, Miss Thomas." They retreated to Clara's small office, where Parker finally allowed his professional mask to slip, a broad smile breaking across his weathered face. "He's considering it seriously," he announced. "Asked for 1 hour to review the terms and compare with what he expects from Continental." Clara sank into her desk chair. "That's more than I dared hope for." "Your brother is a shrewd businessman," Parker continued. "He recognized immediately that our offer has advantages over whatever Continental might propose. No regulatory approvals needed, no complex contract terms, immediate payment." "But he hasn't accepted yet," Vaughn pointed out. "No, but he's weighing it carefully." And I made sure to emphasize the local nature of our consortium. Men who understand and respect the land, who want to see it prosper rather than being stripped for short-term profit. Clara looked up sharply. "Did you mention Vaughn's involvement specifically?" Parker's eyes twinkled. "I may have saved that detail for later negotiations. For now, Mr. Thomas believes I'm the primary investor, with support from local interests I've cultivated over years in the cattle business." "And the Continental representative arrives at noon," Vaughn mused. "Walter will want to use our offer as leverage to improve theirs." "Precisely," Parker agreed. "But that works in our favor as well. If Continental balks at increasing their bid, our offer becomes more attractive by comparison." Clara stood, pacing the small office. "We should know Walter's decision by 11 then, before Continental arrives." "That's my expectation," Parker confirmed. "He's a man who likes to have his ducks in a row. He won't want to be negotiating with us while entertaining Continental." The hour that followed was perhaps the longest of Vaughn's life. Clara retreated to the main house, maintaining a careful distance from both Parker and Vaughn to avoid fueling Walter's suspicions further. Vaughn busied himself with ranch work, though his mind was far from the tasks at hand. At precisely 10:30, Walter emerged onto the porch and called for Parker. The cattle buyer straightened his vest, nodded reassuringly to Vaughn, and strode across the yard with the confidence of a man accustomed to high-stakes negotiations. Another interminable wait followed. Vaughn found himself beneath the oak trees, staring at the bench where he had first found Clara crying over her mother's letter. How much had changed since that moment, not just in circumstances, but within himself. The man who had arrived at the Crawford Ranch less than 2 weeks ago, determined to maintain his emotional distance, now found himself deeply invested in both the ranch's future and the woman who had fought so hard to preserve it. The sound of approaching footsteps drew him from his reverie. He turned to find Clara walking toward him, her expression unreadable. "Walter's made his decision," she said simply. Vaughn's heart hammered in his chest. "And?" A smile broke across her face, transforming her features. "He's accepting our offer. Parker is drawing up the final paperwork now." Relief flooded through Vaughn. "He's really selling to us, not Continental." "Yes." Clara's eyes shone with emotion. "Walter said something surprising, actually. He said that while Continental's offer was slightly higher, he preferred knowing his father's legacy would remain in hands that respected its true value." She shook her head in wonder. "I think somewhere beneath all his Eastern business talk, he still cares about this place." Vaughn stepped closer, unable to resist the urge to share in her joy. "So the ranch is safe. It stays in the Thomas family, with partners who understand what it means beyond dollars and cents." "Yes," she reached for his hands, "and speaking of partners." Before she could continue, Ellis appeared at the edge of the grove, looking distinctly uncomfortable at interrupting. "Miss Thomas, Mr. Caldwell, there's a situation at the main house. Continental's man has arrived early, and he's not happy about Mr. Thomas's decision." They hurried back to find a tense standoff on the porch. A well-dressed stranger, presumably the Continental representative, was gesturing angrily while Walter and Parker maintained calm but firm expressions. "This is highly irregular, Thomas," the man was saying as they approached. "We had an understanding to withdraw at the last moment in favor of some local consortium." "We had discussions, Mr. Hamilton, not an agreement," Walter replied coolly. "I've made my decision based on the merits of both offers." Hamilton noticed Clara and Vaughn's arrival, his gaze sharpening. "Ah, Miss Thomas, perhaps you can explain this sudden change in your brother's position. I understand you've been quite persuasive." The insinuation in his tone was unmistakable. Walter stiffened, surprising Vaughn with a flash of brotherly protectiveness. "My sister made her position clear from the beginning, Hamilton. She preferred to keep the ranch independent of large corporate interests. After careful consideration, I've concluded she was right." Hamilton's expression darkened. "Continental will not take this lightly, Thomas. We have significant investments throughout this region, ways of making operations difficult for those who oppose our interests." "Is that a threat?" Parker stepped forward, his affable demeanor replaced by steely resolve. "Because threats against independent ranchers tend to attract attention from both law enforcement and the press. Continental might find such scrutiny inconvenient." A tense silence followed. Hamilton looked from face to face, apparently reassessing the situation. Finally, he forced a tight smile. "No threat, merely an observation about the challenges of modern cattle operations. I wish you all success with your provincial arrangement." He turned to Walter. "Continental's offer remains open should circumstances change, Thomas. Good day." With that, he descended the porch steps, mounted his waiting horse, and rode away without a backward glance. "Pleasant fellow," Parker remarked dryly. "I suspect we haven't seen the last of Continental in these parts." Walter sighed, looking suddenly tired. "No, but they'll find other targets now. Preferably ones with less formidable defenders." He glanced at Clara with something like respect in his expression. "You've assembled quite a team, sister." Clara's chin lifted. I learned from Father that surrounding yourself with good people is the foundation of any successful operation. A ghost of a smile touched Walter's lips. Indeed, he turned to Parker. Shall we complete our paperwork? I have a train to catch this evening. As the two men returned inside, Clara remained on the porch, watching Hamilton's retreating figure with a thoughtful expression. It seems too easy somehow. After all the worry, all the planning. Vaughn moved to stand beside her. Not easy. You fought for this, Clara, you and everyone who believes in what you're building here. She turned to him, eyes searching his face, including you. The man who never planned to stay anywhere long enough to put down roots. The question hung between them, a final crossroads. Vaughn thought of all the miles he'd traveled, all the outfits he'd ridden for, all the times he'd moved on before attachment could take hold. Then he thought of Clara reading her mother's letter beneath the oak trees, fighting for her heritage with every ounce of her strength, showing him what it meant to belong somewhere completely. Especially me, he said quietly. Turns out I just needed the right place to plant them. The smile that blossomed across her face was like sunrise breaking over the hills, gradual then brilliant. She reached for his hand, interlacing their fingers. So that's what you were going to say last night, before Walter interrupted. Vaughn nodded, that and more. I was going to ask if, beyond our business arrangement, there might be room for something else between us. Something that has nothing to do with cattle or land or investments. Clara stepped closer. There already is, Vaughn. There has been since you found me crying over that letter and respected my privacy even while offering comfort. Since you decided to fight for this ranch when you had every reason to simply ride away. Your mother was right, he said softly, about choosing courage over fear, about finding what truly matters. Yes, she agreed. She was right about many things. The setting sun cast golden light across the land they had fought so hard to protect, turning ordinary fields and buildings into something magnificent. Below the porch, ranch hands went about evening chores, the rhythms of frontier life continuing as they had for generations, difficult but purposeful, challenging but rewarding. So what happens now? Vaughn asked. Clara gazed out at the ranch, her ranch, their ranch, with quiet pride. Now we build something that lasts together. As the light faded from the sky, casting long shadows across the land that had brought them together, Vaughn Caldwell finally understood what his father had been willing to die for, not just property or possession, but the dream of creating something enduring. Something worth loving, something worth fighting for. In Clara Thomas, he had found not just a partner in business but a companion for the journey ahead, whatever challenges it might bring. The letter that had once made her cry now represented not loss but continuity, a thread connecting past to future, mother to daughter, and now to a man who had finally found his way home. The Texas sun slipped below the horizon, but for Vaughn and Clara, standing together on the porch of the ranch they would build into a legacy, it felt more like dawn than dusk, the beginning of something profound, rooted in the soil beneath their feet and the love they had found against all odds in the vast, unpredictable landscape of the American West.